We cross live now to our reporter Mbali Thethani, who is at the historic Liliesleaf Farm with Sir Nick Wolpe, who is the CEO of the Liliesleaf Trust. A very good afternoon to you, Mbali. I mean, where you are now is also one of those iconic places in South Africa that will always be recounted and always be mentioned when one talks about the struggle related to apartheid and liberation, and specifically the Rivonia trialists. What is the reaction that's coming from Liliesleaf today?
Well, South Africa and the world over are mourning the death of George Bezos. So we do know that he played a major role in the fight against apartheid, and we are specifically at a place that has also contributed significantly to his legacy. We are at the Liliesleaf Farm, and we do know that this is the place where a number of the struggle heroes were arrested in the treason trial, and this is where George Bezos represented them during that trial. But just to tell us more about the person that George Bezos was, we are now joined by Nick Wolpe from the Liliesleaf Trust. Now, I just want to get your immediate reaction when you heard of the passing of George Bezos.
I was extremely devastated because, yet again, it symbolizes the passing of another stalwart, but a stalwart in a different capacity, but nevertheless a stalwart who made a significant and meaningful contribution to the struggle by ensuring that those who fought for justice received adequate and appropriate legal counsel. And again, it highlights the fragility of our link to the past. We're now only left with one of that Rivonia cohort that I'd like to refer to. One of the last survivors, which is Dennis Cooney, who was the legal representative for James Cantor, because what people don't realize or are not aware of is that, in fact, there were two legal defense teams, one representing James Cantor and the other representing the remaining 9. And the passing of George is, again, a passing of the candle to history. The current connection, that physical connection, again, has now been broken to the past. Because if you take the two groups of defense lawyers, there is now no one left who represented the main body of Nelson, Walter, Govan, Raymond Mashlaba, Rusty Bernstein, Dennis Goldberg. So that group has now passed into history. We're left, as I mentioned, with Dennis Cooney, the last of that Rivonia cohort. So it just shows the fragility of ensuring that when they pass, we are able to keep the torch of their important contribution, their meaning, what they represented, alive.
And what is the importance of that contributions which they have made? Because, I mean, we know that he was this legal giant, as many have described him to be. What stands out as the most important contributions which he has made? Well,
I think we know that he played a significant role in the Rivonia trial, the Delmas trial. But I think underpinning that was his solid commitment and dedication to the ideals of human rights, the importance of human rights. And I think we must understand where that came from in the context of who he was. He was in occupied Greece, in terms of the Nazis had occupied Greece, so he had seen the vulgarities, he had seen how human beings can behave and treat others and undermine those fundamental principles of human rights. And I think that is what installed in him that sense of the need to protect and ensure that our rights, human rights, are protected, even though the struggle against apartheid had been won and the elections of 1994 symbolized a new democratic South Africa. I think for George and those in the field of human rights meant that nothing had changed in the kind of global context, in the sense of there was still the struggle to protect human rights. There was still a need to ensure that the human rights of individuals were protected. And he was vehement in that. He was it was something that was not just a job. It was something that was personal. We were listening earlier on to him talking about 3 days before how he had gone to see one of the British officials and how he was describing the fact that the guy had what he thought had been too much to drink. And as he was leaving, he said the guy put his arm around him and said, "You do not have to worry. They're not going to receive the death sentence and Rusty's going to be released." But you could hear his voice crack for a split second. You could hear him beginning to cry. And that was something that I noticed very much with him. I remember us standing outside the thatched cottage and he was discussing this very event. And he started to cry. So it was more than just saying it's a job. It was something that he believed in with his heart. It was something he believed in emotionally. It was something that he felt very passionately about. And that symbolized what the others were like as well in terms of the struggle. So he was from that same ilk, that same generation, who had a deep-seated passion. And he was a person that firmly believed in. And the struggle to protect human rights still continued long afterwards. That's why he continued to work, because he recognized the threat to our human rights. We saw it recently under the COVID-19 with the brutality of the army and the police, and the questions being raised around, the civil liberties, individual human rights being abused. So just because we attain democracy, and just because, we talk about the world, most of the world living under a so-called democratic regime, it doesn't mean that one's human rights are protected. Look at the whole question around the United States. Black Lives Matter. The indiscriminate killing and victimization by the police highlights that human rights are still a threat in terms of being undermined and abused. And I think that's what made George so unique.
Now, a number of people have spoken at length about the kind of person he was. You knew him personally. If you were to describe him to somebody who didn't know him at all, how would you describe George Bezos?
Like I say, a person of passion, a person who holds his emotion on his cuffs. What you see is what you get. He doesn't hold back. But he also had a very nice sense of humor. He saw the irony in things. He saw that even within the dark days of oppression, within the dark days of the struggle of trying to overcome and get rid of this abhorrent system called apartheid, he saw the amusing side. I always remember one of the stories he told me was that he one day received a call from my father, Harold Wolpe, and my father said to him, "Meet me at the CNA in downtown Johannesburg." I mean, unfortunately, I don't know exactly where. So he arrived, he said, and he saw my father looking into CNA. He walked up next to him, and he said he stood next to him, and my father said, "Don't look at me." And as he said, "Don't look at me," George turned to him, and my father snapped him and said, "I told you not to look at me." But George was recalling it in a very humoristic manner, thinking like, this is cloak and daggers, because then my father said to him very quietly, he said, "You need to represent me in court. I'm disappearing." So you could just imagine George's mind thinking, oh my God, this is like a George Smiley, a kind of Cold War reenactment where the guy suddenly disappears, vanishes, because that's effectively. And he recalled that story. And then he recalled the story of James Cantor and how he said he was, and he couldn't hold back the laughter because he said it was a very funny event. He said, here was Justice de Wet chastising Percy Utah and being very facetious with him, saying, are you seriously charging this man with sabotage because he fed the chickens at Liliesleaf? And he said it was a kind of caricature event, because here was this judge who was being very kind of disrespectful and condescending, he said, to the prosecutor, who was, this very uptight, very serious individual who was grandstanding, who was trying to do everything to undermine the defence's case. And he said it was a comedy that he was witnessing. And in recalling it, he was laughing. You could barely hear him audibly because of the laugh of recalling this story.
Right.
Thank you very much, of course. That is Nick Wolpe. He is from the Liliesleaf Trust. They're just talking about the life of George Bezos and the major contributions he has made to human rights, and also just highlighting the legal mind in which George Bezos was. It's back to you.